I am going to demonstrate in this video how to run a regression analysis, and I am only going to cover on the second individual project sheet through E, an explanation of the order of contribution, because that's all I'm asking you all to do for this assignment. So I have SPSS open. I am looking at the downloading music data set, which I like to use to demonstrate this. And so to run a regression analysis, this is where we are trying to predict or explain our dependent variable. So the dependent variable is what I want to explain or what I want to predict. The independent variables are the factors that I think I can use to explain the dependent variable. And so my goal is to explain as much of that dependent variable as possible, understanding that by adding more independent variables, I can explain more of how to predict or how to understand that dependent variable. The more independent variables I add that are statistically significant, the more of the dependent variable I should be able to explain or predict. Okay, so I'm looking at SPSS, and to run this, I'm going to go to Analyze, Regression, and then Linear. So these are the three steps I take. I'm going to click on Linear. And in this data set, I like to use the statement number 39. I plan to continue to download music illegally in the future. So what I want to be able to predict is what are those factors that correlate or are associated with people who plan to continue to download music illegally in the future. So I'm going to go down to behavior 39, and I'm going to use that as my dependent variable. And I'm just highlighting it and then moving it into the dependent variable. I'm going to start making this a bivariate regression, which means I will only have one independent variable. And remember that all the independent variables must be statistically significant. And I've played with this data set, so I know that social 3 predicts a lot of the dependent variable. So I'm going to move that in, simply say OK, and look at what I've got. So this, I think, is to me fascinating because I have picked simply one question, and let me delete the information at the top just to be able to provide more room. So I think it's fascinating that I can pick one question and that can be statistically significant and have a large ability to explain people's intention to continue to illegally download music. Let me move this bar over, give us a little bit more to look at on the screen. And so over here it tells me in this first table that our dependent variable is behavior 39. That's good. That's what I wanted. And it shows that social 3 is the variable I have included to try to explain behavior 39. When I want to determine whether I have a statistically significant linear equation, I come down to the ANOVA table and I look at the sig. And the sig in this case is 0.000. We know that our rule of thumb has consistently been 0.05 or less, and we know we have statistical significance. In this situation, we have a statistically significant linear model. So we know we've got something to work with. We want to then go down and make sure that our independent variable is statistically significant. So we come down to the coefficients table, and we see that social 3 is statistically significant with a sig of 0.000. We also see that our constant or our intercept is statistically significant. And since we have a statistically significant linear equation and our independent variable in this bivariate regression is significant, I can come up to the model summary table and I see our adjusted R-square is 0.341. Now the adjusted R-square tells us how well our linear equation can actually predict our dependent variable. And so we look at the adjusted R-square. This is always going to be more accurate than the R-square because it takes into consideration a number of factors, including our sample size. So we know by looking at this that our independent variable can predict approximately 34% of our dependent variable, which is really a lot. One question that can tell us how likely somebody is to plan to continue to illegally download music in the future really tells us a lot, because we know consumer behavior is hard to predict. We know that as consumers, we are kind of fickle, and there are a million factors, probably literally, that impact any one consumption decision that we make. And so coming down, let's look at what is Social 3. Social 3 says downloading music from illegal sites is a common practice among my friends. So we know that if somebody has friends who illegally download music, that individual is probably likely to plan to continue to illegally download music in the future. So let's look at the individual assignment. And it says A. First of all, this talks about multiple regression. And multiple regression means that you need at least 2 statistically significant independent variables. And do I have 2 statistically significant independent variables? I do not. So before I can turn in this assignment, I need to have at least 2 statistically significant independent variables. So I'm going to close this, save the contents, I don't need it. And I'm going to go back to Analyze, Regression, and Linear. And I'm going to add one more independent variable that I think can help explain. And let's see, I looked at this and it says legal 30 is statistically significant. And that really talks about I plan to download music from legal sites. I'm not, for my theoretical looking at this, I really don't want to use that one because I think that is kind of just the opposite and really almost intuitive. I'm going to add behavior 38, which says, let's see, I often download the entire CD. So let's look at that one, behavior 38. And I'm going to also add that. So I'm going to highlight that as an independent variable. I'm going to add that. And now, if they're both statistically significant, I will have a statistically significant multiple regression. So I'm going to say OK. And there you go. So by adding behavior 38, I was able to increase the adjusted R-square to 0.38, which is actually very interesting. Now with only 2 questions, I can explain about 38% of my dependent variable. But I want to see if I still have a statistically significant linear model. I do. My sig is 0.000. And when I come down to my coefficients table, I see that both of my independent variables are statistically significant as well as the constant. So let me then go to the assignment sheet. Since I now have a statistically significant multiple regression, I'm going to delete the above information. I'm going to move this bar over to give us a little bit more room, make this a little more visible. So coming over to my sheet, it says, please conduct and fully explain one statistically significant multiple regression equation. I've done that. And A, it says, please explain the dependent variable and the independent variables. I am going to simply explain that my dependent variable is behavior 39. I plan to continue to download music illegally in the future. And I am going to explain that with the 2 independent variables, which I have used, which are social 3. Downloading music from illegal sites is a common practice among my friends. And behavior 38, which says I often download the entire CD. So this means that those people who plan to continue to illegally download music, number 1, their friends illegally download music, and number 2, they like a lot of music. They're not just downloading a song at a time, they often like to download the entire CD. B says, state where you looked for determination of statistical significance and include the specific numbers. I would say I looked at the ANOVA table and saw 0.000, and this told me that I had a statistically significant linear equation and that both of my independent variables were statistically significant, and I saw that at the coefficients table, and both of those are also 0.000. Number C says state the null hypothesis for this equation and for the variables I accepted. And in this, I am saying that social 3 and behavior 38 do not predict behavior 39. Again, the null is always that it is not going to tell us that we can do what we are trying to do in that. And number D, the amount of variability in the dependent variable that is explained by the independent variables. Again, that is the adjusted R-square. Approximately 38% of somebody's intention to illegally download music in the future can be predicted by behavior 38. I often download the entire CD, and social 3, my friends, what is it specifically? It says downloading music from illegal sites is a common practice among my friends. And the last thing I'm asking you to tell me is an order of the contribution of each variable in predicting the dependent variable. And as you remember, for that, we come down to the standardized beta coefficients, and we look at the absolute value of each of these. Absolute value means you ignore any negative signs. So we know by looking at this that social 3 predicts the most.